David. David.
Dave, are you in the fridge again? Get out of the fridge.
David.
What is up, everyone? This is David Wells, the host of the David Wells Experiment, and let's get with it. Here's an episode. So, I'm sure if you've got the internet, then you've seen all these streaming services. Spotify, Hulu, YouTube, yada yada yada. The list goes on and on. Now, a lot of these sites will have a free model, but if you remember a pre-internet era, you'll remember that how expensive cable was. And if you're from my generation, you'll be like, why can't we watch Cartoon Network, or why can't we watch Nickelodeon? And your parents would have to say, well, that's on cable and that's expensive. Now, by the grace of God, I was able to, what was it? Oh yeah. Our trailer park had a deal where we got cable, and at first the cable was limited, but then it pretty much had everything. So I got to have a very similar experience to a lot of other people, and cable was one of the few things that we sort of got to indulge. Another indulgence that we got to have was video stores. So for those who don't know, pre-internet, pre-Netflix, video stores were these stores that had copies of movies. They were on video cassettes and DVDs, and you go to the store, you'd browse around, you pick up a cassette or DVD, and you'd rent it for like the weekend or 5 days. And if you didn't return it promptly, you'd get charged a late fee. The prices ranged anywhere from $1.62 to $5. So if you weren't rich and you couldn't buy a movie all the time, then you had your options. Now, what happened to the decline of video stores? Well, what really happened was DVDs made it cheaper and cheaper to just buy movies. And so if you knew you were going to like a movie, you thought, what's the sense in renting one? Also, one of the things that happened with streaming services was they had a large variety, and you didn't have to wait for a copy. It was just right then and there. And also Redbox happened. They're basically like soda machines, but they had movies. So from an economic standpoint, Redbox put video stores out of business because they basically had all the highlights of what a video store had, the stuff that people were most likely to rent, and they were a fraction of the cost. So that was a death blow. And then Netflix, of course, and streaming services. And so gradually video stores came to an end. There are still a few mom and pop stores now and then, but there really isn't such a thing as a major chain of video rental stores. And as I've mentioned before in a previous episode about the iPod, streaming, it looked like streaming was going to do away with video cassettes and vinyl, but in the last decade, or it might have been in the first decade of the 2000s, vinyl started to make a comeback, and then it really made a comeback, and then so did CDs and cassettes. Both of those, their sales have been steadily rising. So you might be thinking, what does that have to do with the modern day? So here's what I think is going to happen. I can't help but wonder if streaming services are kind of digging their own grave. Well, maybe Netflix particular, but I think it's going to become one of those things that people are going to want to save money. They're going to, I think people are going to get to a point where they're like, do we really want to pay this much a month for a bunch of shows that we don't watch when really it's these couple of shows? And I think people might start unsubscribing, canceling their subscriptions. I think that might be the case with Netflix. One of the craziest things I heard Netflix is doing is they're looking at the possibility of a 45 theatrical window for some of their bigger movies, the ones they think could stand a chance in the theater, because Netflix has had a bit of a rough time. Netflix wasn't killed the way we thought they would be when Disney Plus and HBO Max came around, but it's not great for them. I mean, they're still there, but yeah, it's a rough time for the service that pioneered the platform. So I remember, I think it was in the last decade or so, if you bought a DVD, you got like a digital copy. And I kind of can't help but feel for people who really want to save, I have a feeling that we might go back to that. People who really love their entertainment, they'll buy a copy, they'll get a digital copy. I think that if you want to improve sales, really sell that on the whole. You don't have to keep forking out this cash for Netflix, Disney Plus, Hulu, and HBO Max every month. Here, just buy this, and if you feel like buying more stuff, I cannot wonder if like just the economics of the time we're going through, because gas was $4.20 this morning, and given the trend of the last couple days, compounding from the last couple months, I feel like I wouldn't be surprised if by the end of the weekend it was $5 or close to it. I was even thinking of getting an electric bike because I Google mapped my work, and apparently a bike ride is only a half hour away. I mean, I could do that if I needed to. Be resourceful just to save on gas. Anyway, so what happens next? And I wanted to title this video An Analog Renaissance, but I ultimately chose not to. Probably a disconnected renaissance. Like, I could see the end of subscriptions and streaming services, or them falling somewhat from their former glories, if driven only by like the fact of economics. I think we might see a return to people just, like I've said before, buying a particular song or buying a particular album rather than a constant monthly streaming service. It'd be interesting to see those companies offer such a service. And honestly, one of the things I've felt a bit uncomfortable about them is the idea of they can take stuff away any moment. Like if they decide, if there's some controversy or backlash, they can yank it from their services. Whereas with physical medium, if something happened, you could make your own choice about what you wanted to do, and you had the option of watching a movie and it being archived. I've never been totally sold on the idea of streaming only or digital only. And as I've mentioned before, I do prefer to read books, like when I'm learning something. Again, you could say it's not a very rational thing, but for me, there's the tactile feeling of touching the book and the words being printed on it, and you like touching the thing that the words are printed on. It's almost like maybe psychologically it helps me to get the information better. It's really not a rational thing, but it's just kind of how I'm wired and how I operate. So it'll be really interesting to see how people save money. I guess that's what I'm getting at with this video is people are getting creative and they're having to think, how can I save? And I kind of can't help but feel that buying a single movie or a single song or album or whatever that you really want, rather than subscribing for thousands of stuff you may never listen to, that might be the way to go for people. Because we did that for a couple decades, and streaming is really only something new. And a lot of the kids who didn't grow up with that, they're turning to that old stuff, if only for the novelty of it. Like, I never saw Polaroids making a comeback, but it's a thing of, you take a Polaroid and you're like, oh, I've got something tangible and physical. It's almost as though it makes the moment feel more real. Now, certainly, I don't think that we're going to get rid of streaming or anything, but I mean, I'd hope not, because how else are you going to listen to my podcast? Wouldn't it be the craziest thing if this podcast wound up on a cassette or a CD? Lol. But anyway, I do think things aren't going to become quite so uniform. And as we've seen with certain creators being taken off certain platforms, yeah, I think people are going to they're going to become more resourceful, and yeah, I suppose I should have had more coffee today, but oh well. So this has been an episode of the David Wells Experiment. Have an absolutely super day. Make sure you get some B12 vitamins so you don't stumble around in your speech like me. And we'll see you next time. Bye.